In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hello and welcome to the Layman Confessor. Today is a special episode because we get to talk about St. Nicholas, one of my absolute favorite saints. And I think if you listened to my series on saints that Protestants should know, I said that same thing about every single one of those saints as well. St. Nicholas is among the greatest saints in church history, and I am so excited to talk about him today, particularly because he has become part of this Christmas canon that we have here in the West. He developed into this character that we now call Santa Claus, and the Santa Claus that we know of today has really little to do with the St. Nicholas of history. And so I know a lot of people are doing this right now. I know this is probably just going to be white noise among all of the other noise and podcasts out there. But I really think it was worth just taking some time to talk about St. Nicholas. In particular, I want to talk about three stories specifically about St. Nicholas. These are probably the most famous of his stories. And perhaps together we can figure out maybe how these helped to develop the Santa Claus mythos that we have today. First, a little bit about St. Nicholas. He was born in AD 280, so very early, just a couple hundred years after the New Testament was written and complete. And he was from a small village called Patara that is in today Turkey. He ended up dying about 70 years later, right around AD 350. And at that time, he was the Bishop of Myra, which is also in Turkey. Now, one of the really cool things about Nicholas is that he was always a very practical man. He was he believed that shepherding his flock meant physically shepherding them, right? I mean, he took care of the physical needs of his flock, and he often gave of his own wealth. He was born into a fairly wealthy family. He rejected most of that wealth after becoming a member of the church. He was even taken into captivity for a while after his little church was destroyed. And there's so many beautiful stories about Nicholas, but I want to talk about three. All right, first of all, and this is probably the most well-known, second most well-known perhaps, depending on what circles you run in. But this is the story of the three daughters. Right? There was in a town there was a poor man who had three daughters, and at this time, for women to get married, their families had to pay a dowry to the suitor. And this man was so poor that he did not have the money to pay this dowry for his daughters to get married. And so they were really left with one option. Some sources say, or some stories rather, say that he was going to have to sell them into slavery. Other sources said that he was going to have to sell them into prostitution. Whichever one of those sources you think is correct, the outcome is still bad. And just to be clear, this is not something that this father wanted to do. He wanted to avoid this at all costs. However, he was poor enough, and where and when they lived in the Roman world, there was just no other way around this. Christianity had not yet taken hold, and so women were treated really, really poorly. Somehow Nicholas finds out that the case of these three young women and the poverty of their father. And so on the night of the oldest daughter's, or the night before his oldest daughter's birthday, Nicholas sneaks over to the house, and he has a bag of money, his own money, and he slips it through the window. Right? She wakes up the next morning, she finds it. It's enough to pay a dowry. She was able to get married. And he did the same thing for the second daughter on the eve of her birthday, of her coming to age as well. And legend has it, on the eve of the third daughter's birthday, when she was coming of age. The father, who had gotten wise to this, they hadn't been able to discover who it was that was slipping them the money, but they knew that it had happened the 2 times before, and so the father thought that it might happen this 3rd time, sat underneath the window waiting for the bag of money to come down, potentially to take it for himself. Well, Nicholas, seeing this, then climbs to the top of the house and drops the bag of gold down the chimney, and it lands in the youngest daughter's shoe. And so, her sock, which was hung by the fire in order to dry. And so that's all of the women were saved from slavery or from prostitution, again, depending on which of the sources you're looking at. And we get a couple of our traditions there. Clearly, stockings and the exchange of little chocolate coins, which I don't know. That's not a very popular one here in the U.S., but in other cultures it is. And on St. Nicholas Day, which is in early December, on his feast day, it's common for children to leave their shoes out, and the parents come and put those gold coins into their shoes. Chocolate gold coins, not real gold coins. That would be an immensely expensive tradition. The second story is a little less believable, really fantastic, and I absolutely love it. This one's just strange, and it's one of those niche stories that just make it fun to be on the inside of, right? So apparently, there were 3 young boys that were on a journey, and they had they were poor, so they didn't have money to rent a room anywhere. So they knock on the door of a butcher. This butcher is also rather poor, and it hasn't been a good couple of years for him. The meat that he's getting has not been great. And these 3 boys knock on his door. They're all orphans, evidently, and they say, "We have no money, we have no family. We're on this journey, though. Would you be willing to give us a room for the night?" This butcher, who is in almost just as desperate a situation, says, "Yes, of course, absolutely, I can give you a room." He invites them in, he feeds them, and then all at once, without them knowing it, or, well, they would eventually come to know of it, but totally catching them off guard, he kills all 3 of them and then butchers them in only a way that a butcher can. He sticks them into pickle barrels in order to let them pickle for a while, with the intention, perhaps, of selling them as, presumably, pork meat. So if you've ever seen fried green tomatoes, you know where this may be going, or where he was wanting to go. Well, sometime later, some legends say as many as 4 or 5 months later, St. Nicholas comes by, not knowing that this has happened. He knocks on the butcher's door for the same reason. He needs a place to stay. The butcher invites him in. As soon as Nicholas crosses the threshold of the butcher's home, he realizes somehow, probably through divine revelation, of what happened, what the butcher has done. And so immediately, he yells at the butcher, telling him how wicked he is, and then he walks over. He's able to tell which pickle barrel that the boys' remains are in. Some stories say it was 3 different pickle barrels, but regardless, he was able to identify where those boys' remains were. He opened up the pickle barrels and was able to resurrect them somehow. I can't imagine how it would have smelled or what condition they were in, but regardless, they went from being chopped up and in a pickle jar to being resurrected and whole again. And it's from this story that if you've ever seen someone with a pickle ornament on their Christmas tree, this is the story that tradition comes from. Again, there's this tie between St. Nicholas and Christmas. This is another one of those stories that was sort of adopted into that. And I love it because, pickles are green and they're hanging on green trees, so they're not as obviously visible as some of the other stories or some of the other ornaments. And so it's just one of those things. I love looking for it whenever I visit someone's home during Christmas, just to see if they have one. And if they do, it's just this insider excitement that I get, because it's just, I don't know, such a wild story, and it's just fun to have those sorts of things, right? The third story, and the most significant, and I think a great segue into what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of episodes, is his actions at the Council of Nicaea against Arius. Now, Arius, this took place in 325 AD. There were thousands. Evidently, there were about 2,000 people in attendance at this council, most of them being bishops. It was so full there in Nicaea that they had as many as a dozen bishops having to share a room in some of these lodges. And Nicholas was there as well. And the purpose of this council was to debate the nature of Christ. There was this man, Arius, who had been traveling around. And he was really clever in the way that he did this, actually. But he was traveling around teaching that Jesus wasn't God, but he was like God. He was not of the same substance as God, but he was a similar substance. There's some Greek distinctions that we could go into here, but we won't for the sake of simplicity. Now, I said he was really creative in the way that he did this, or really clever, because what he did was he would take sea shanties. This is Arius. And he would go to port towns and take these sea shanty tunes and then adapt his teachings to fit these tunes. And then he'd spend evenings at bars teaching sailors his songs. And so these guys are on their traveling around on their ships, these merchant vessels, singing these shanties as they're working. And in those days, there was no difference between like a passenger ship and a cargo ship. They were all cargo ships, and you would pay your way to get onto one of these cargo ships to try and get somewhere, right? If you were wanting to cross the Mediterranean, you weren't looking for a passenger ship. You were looking for any ship that was going to the place that you wanted to go to. And so private citizens who were traveling around the Roman Empire were hearing these shanties as well. And, the nature of the Trinity is difficult, right? 3 persons, 1 God. The nature of Christ is tricky. 100% God, 100% man. Like, mathematically, that's confusing. And so for someone who is having trouble keeping all of this, balanced in their mind, it made sense that Christ was like the Father, right? The Son was like the Father, but he wasn't exactly like him, right? Like, that seems reasonable to our ears, but it's a rejection of who Christ said he was, right? In the Gospels. And so this council got together to talk about this and to figure out, is there any biblical standing for this? And there clearly wasn't. But throughout the entire council, Arius is just holding firm to his position, saying that Christ was only like God. Nicholas is fed up with this, and near the end of the council, he rushes over to Arius. Some sources say that he slapped him across the face. Some say he slapped his ear. Others say he punched him. Regardless of what happened, there was this strong, visceral reaction to this man who was rejecting the nature of Christ, who was rejecting what Christ himself said about himself. And regardless of how you feel about physically reacting to someone who disagrees with you, I think there is something to be said for wanting to take a strong response to a person who is denying Christ, who is denying the nature of Christ, despite mountains of evidence right? Despite mountains of tradition, despite everything that the scriptures say. And that really is going to point us or direct us into our next couple of episodes. I want to look at the lives of Saint Benedict, the founder of Western monasticism, and Saint Boniface, like the destroyer of idols, the patron saint of Europe. They have very different lives, and there are very different lessons that we learn from their lives. But I think there's something to take away for all of us from both of their lives. And we'll look at those more in the next couple of episodes. But until then, I hope you enjoy these short stories from Nicholas. Spend some time, read his hagiography, watch some other videos about him. He was a remarkable man, a man who deeply believed in practically loving the people in his parish, who recognized and understood Christ's call to pastors when he told Peter to feed his sheep. Nicholas understood that, and he was so intentional about it, even during that time when he was in prison. It's a beautiful life. There's some beautiful examples, and there's some really wild stories to go along with it. Thank you for joining me today again. Y'all, this has been a lot of fun. Until next time, remember, stand strong for what you believe to be right, and hold fast to what you know to be true.